Darkness has a way of creeping in where we least expect it. Betrayal is a slow knife. It cuts deep, but it never bleeds right away. Craig Rideout had no idea that the people he loved the most, the ones closest to him, were the same ones plotting his end. A man who trusted his family only to be repaid with deceit, cruelty, and an unthinkable crime. What happened on that fateful day in 2016? And how did a father's final moments turn into one of the most disturbing cases of family betrayal in modern crime history? This is the twisted murder of Craig Rideout. The victim. Craig Rideout was an ordinary man living in Penfield, New York. A devoted father of 7, a hard-working professional, and a man navigating the wreckage of a failed marriage. Life wasn't perfect, but he was trying. He believed in second chances, in starting over, in doing right by his children. But the storm brewing around him was far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The divorce had been ugly. His ex-wife, Laura, had painted him as an unfit father, a manipulative partner. Craig fought tirelessly for custody, his love for his children outweighing the bitter accusations hurled his way. His friends saw a man who had been bruised but not broken, a father who refused to walk away. He had sacrificed so much, financially and emotionally, to remain a part of his children's lives. But every effort was met with resistance, every attempt at peace shattered by an invisible war being waged against him. Craig wasn't perfect, but he was present. His co-workers spoke of his dedication, his neighbors remembered his kindness, and his children, despite being caught in the crossfire, were always at the center of his world. He wanted stability, but the ground beneath him was crumbling. He tried to reason with Laura, to make things civil for the sake of their children, but it seemed nothing would ever be enough. Laura's influence over the older children was suffocating, and Craig could feel them slipping away. The thought of losing them haunted him. Behind closed doors, a different story was being written, one where Craig was no longer the father fighting for his children, but the obstacle standing in the way. And Craig would never live to read its final page. Tension between Craig and Laura had reached a breaking point. Their arguments were no longer just about custody. They had become darker, more venomous. Craig confided in close friends that he felt like a target, that Laura and those around her were pushing him out of his own children's lives. The bitterness was palpable, the hostility unmistakable. In the weeks leading up to his murder, Craig was doing everything he could to rebuild his life. He was focused on his job, trying to stay strong for his younger children and attempting to mend what was left of his broken family. But beneath the surface, a sinister plot was unfolding, one he couldn't see coming. Someone wanted Craig gone, not just out of their lives, but permanently erased. It wasn't just a custody battle anymore, it was a countdown, and time was running out. On the night of his murder, Craig's world came crashing down. A brutal attack, a desperate attempt to cover it up, and a crime so calculated that it would send shockwaves through the entire community. His body, discarded like an afterthought, would be discovered miles away, a grim testament to the lengths his killers were willing to go. Craig Rideout was many things, a father, a friend, a man struggling to hold on. But in the eyes of those who saw him as a problem, he was something else. He was disposable, and that cost him his life. The disappearance. On July 19th, 2016, Craig Rideout was reported missing. It started with unanswered calls, then a troubling silence. Craig wasn't the kind of man to disappear without a word. His friends and co-workers knew something was off. Laura Rideout and her sons, Colin and Alexander, claimed to know nothing. Their responses were rehearsed, their concern mechanical, but the gaps in their stories began to widen. Little details didn't add up. Their words felt scripted, their emotions detached. As the hours stretched on, Craig's absence became more than a mystery. It became a chilling omen. Those who knew him best refused to accept the silence. They called, they searched, they begged for answers. But what they didn't know was that Craig's fate had already been sealed. Somewhere in the shadows, the truth lay hidden, waiting to be uncovered. And then, the nightmare took a darker turn. Just hours after Craig was last seen, a neighbor reported something strange and an unfamiliar car parked near his home, its engine idling in the dead of night. Later, security footage would reveal blurry figures moving in and out of Craig's house, carrying objects wrapped in sheets, loading them into a vehicle. The signs were there, scattered like puzzle pieces waiting to be put together. But by the time anyone realized the severity of the situation, Craig was already gone. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was an erasure. A carefully orchestrated, vanishing act meant to rewrite the narrative to make Craig a ghost before his body was even found. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, and soon the world would come to know the horror of what really happened to Craig Rideout. Days passed, and the search for Craig intensified. Flyers were posted, news stations covered his sudden disappearance, and law enforcement pressed for leads. Family members, including Laura and the children, maintained their composure in public, offering little insight into Craig's whereabouts. But behind closed doors, tensions ran high. The inconsistencies in their statements became harder to ignore. Then came the breakthrough. A grim discovery that shattered any hope of finding Craig alive. His body was found in a remote wooded area in Yates County, over an hour away from his home. The state he was in made the crime all the more horrific. Craig had been brutally beaten, his face disfigured beyond recognition, and his body doused in acid in a desperate attempt to erase evidence. It was a scene ripped straight from a nightmare. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The once missing father was now the victim of a calculated and merciless crime. Investigators knew they were dealing with something deeply sinister. Someone had wanted Craig not just dead, but erased, as if he had never existed. And that meant one chilling truth. This was not a crime of passion, but of planning. With Craig's body identified, the focus turned to his last known moments. Phone records, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence began weaving a story more disturbing than anyone had imagined. A story of betrayal, premeditation, and unimaginable cruelty. The truth wasn't just coming. It was about to explode into the light. The body discovery. A day after Craig went missing, a grim discovery was made in the woods of Yates County. A disfigured body wrapped in a tarp, its face burned beyond recognition. The stench of death clung to the air. Whoever had done this wanted the body to disappear, to make it unidentifiable. But they had failed. A chilling realization dawned on investigators. This wasn't just a murder, it was an attempt to erase a man's existence. The coroner confirmed the worst. It was Craig Rideout. His face had been destroyed with acid, an act of sheer malice. His hands were bound, his body bearing the marks of a brutal struggle. He had fought, but in the end, he had lost. And the people responsible, they were still pretending to grieve. More details soon emerged. A nearby campsite where burned clothing and tools of destruction lay discarded. A trail of careless mistakes that would unravel the entire plot. The evidence was stacking up, and the net was closing in. Craig's killers thought they had buried the truth, but in their attempt to erase him, they had left behind something even more damning. Their own fingerprints on the crime itself. There was no hiding anymore. The walls were closing in, and soon the world would see the true faces behind this monstrous act. The investigation. From the moment Craig Rideout's body was discovered, investigators knew they were dealing with something far more sinister than a random act of violence. The way his remains had been defiled, the acid burns, the careful wrapping of his body in a tarp, spoke of a calculated crime. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure Craig could never be identified. But in their attempt to erase him, they had left behind something far more incriminating, a trail of evidence that would lead straight to them. The first major breakthrough came when detectives traced Craig's last known movements. His car was missing, but it wouldn't be long before it turned up, abandoned, stripped of anything valuable, as if the person responsible had wanted to distance themselves from the crime. Inside, police found signs of a struggle, smudges of blood, wiped hastily but still detectable under forensic light. It was clear Craig hadn't just been taken, he had been ambushed. Then came the next discovery: 2 people caught on a security camera making a suspicious purchase at a Walmart just hours before Craig vanished. They bought rubber gloves, bleach, garbage bags, and drain cleaner, the very tools used in an attempt to dispose of his body. Their faces? Colin Rideout and his mother, Laura Rideout. Search warrants were executed, and what police uncovered next was the smoking gun. In Laura Rideout's home, investigators found muddy boots, with traces of the same soil found near the crime scene. In her garage, the gloves and cleaning supplies were stuffed away, as if someone had tried to hide them, but didn't have the foresight to get rid of them completely. And then, the most damning piece of all, Craig's own laptop, found discarded near a dumpster, wiped clean but still holding fragments of deleted emails and court documents related to his custody battle. Cell phone records sealed their fate. On the night Craig was murdered, Colin and Alexander Rideout's phones pinged off towers near the crime scene. They had been there, they had participated. The final piece of the puzzle came when police examined the timeline. Craig's murder wasn't spontaneous. It had been in the making for weeks. Laura had manipulated her sons, fed them lies about their father, made them believe he was the enemy, and in their blind loyalty, they had done the unthinkable. When confronted, their reaction spoke volumes. Laura denied everything, feigning ignorance, playing the role of the distraught ex-wife. But her sons? Their resolve crumbled. Colin, the eldest, broke first, his statements laced with half-truths and contradictions. Alexander followed, his silence more damning than any confession. They thought they had covered their tracks. They thought they had buried the evidence, but murder is never clean. The truth has a way of surfacing, and now it was staring them right in the face. The Rideouts had conspired, planned, and executed one of the most heinous crimes in family history. And now, justice was coming for them. The betrayal. Craig's murder wasn't random. It was personal. It wasn't the work of a stranger lurking in the shadows, but of the very people he had spent his life loving, protecting, and fighting for. His own sons, Colin and Alexander Rideout, had conspired against him. Under the influence of their mother, they believed their father was an obstacle, one that needed to be removed. And they were willing to do the unthinkable to make that happen. The betrayal began long before Craig took his final breath. Laura Rideout had poisoned her sons' minds, spinning a web of lies that cast Craig as the villain in a story where she was the victim. She made them believe that the only way forward, the only way to secure their future, was to erase their father from existence. And slowly, bit by bit, they began to see murder not as a crime, but as a solution. In the dead of night, Craig was lured into a trap. Maybe he suspected something was off, or maybe he still trusted them enough to let his guard down. But once they had him, there was no escape. He was ambushed, strangled, beaten. His body left broken and discarded like an afterthought. He had fought back. The evidence showed signs of a struggle, but he was outnumbered, and the people attacking him weren't faceless killers. They were his own flesh and blood. And the worst part, they didn't just kill him. They tried to erase him. The acid burns on his face. The disposal of his body in the remote woods. It was all done with a chilling level of calculation. They wanted to strip him of his identity, to make sure no one would ever look at that body and see the man who had once been a devoted father. They wanted him to disappear, to become nothing more than a footnote in their lives. But they failed. Murder leaves traces, and betrayal leaves wounds that never heal. Craig's killers believed they could rewrite history, but in their arrogance, they left behind something they could never erase: the undeniable proof of their own guilt. The moment the police closed in, the family dynamic shifted. Laura Rideout, the orchestrator, maintained her innocence, pretending to be the grieving ex-wife. But her sons, her pawns, began to crack. Colin and Alexander, once so certain of their actions, now faced the reality of what they had done. The weight of their father's blood was too much to bear. Colin, the elder son, was the first to break. His demeanor shifted. His words faltered. He had been led down a dark path, and now, standing in the harsh light of justice, he realized there was no way out. Alexander, quieter, more reserved, followed soon after. The truth they had tried to bury with their father's body was now rising to the surface, and with it, the horrifying reality of their actions. Craig Rideout's murder was a crime of cruelty, a crime of cold-blooded betrayal. It was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, it was a calculated execution of a man who had loved his family unconditionally. And in the end, the ones who had sought to erase him had only ensured that his story would never be forgotten. Betrayal doesn't just kill the victim, it destroys everyone involved. And for the Rideouts, there was no escaping the consequences of their actions. The courtroom would soon become the stage for their reckoning, but the true punishment had already begun. The weight of what they had done would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Justice served? The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Laura Rideout, Colin Rideout, and Alexander Rideout guilty. The betrayal had come full circle. The same family that had plotted Craig's death now sat behind bars, their futures destroyed by their own hands. But was it justice? Craig was still gone. His life, his dreams, his love for his children all gone. And for what? A twisted, senseless act of cruelty. The Rideouts had orchestrated his death as if it were a simple solution, an inconvenience removed. But in their attempt to silence Craig, they had sealed their own fate. Justice had been served, but it had come too late. Craig's life had been stolen, and no verdict could change that. As the sentences were handed down, Laura remained emotionless, her cold composure unshaken. Colin, once so confident in his mother's influence, now sat hunched over, his face pale, realizing the rest of his life would be spent behind prison bars. Alexander, the youngest of them, had tears in his eyes, perhaps not for Craig, but for himself, for the reality that had finally caught up with him. The courtroom held its breath as the judge delivered the final words. Life in prison, no chance of parole. For Craig's family, the ones who truly loved him, it was a small victory wrapped in immeasurable grief. Nothing could bring him back, but at least the ones who had betrayed him would never walk free again. Outside the courthouse, reporters scrambled to capture the moment. The public had followed the case with a mix of horror and fascination. How could a mother convince her sons to kill their father? How deep did her manipulation run? And how could two young men go through with such an unspeakable act? But those questions would never have answers that made sense, because some betrayals are beyond comprehension. Some wounds never heal. Craig Rideout's story was one of love, sacrifice, and ultimate betrayal. He had fought for his children, and in the end, they had been the ones to take everything from him. This wasn't just a murder. It was the destruction of a family from the inside out. And as the Rideouts faded from the headlines, locked away in the darkness they had created, one thing remained certain. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Craig's absence left an irreplaceable void in the lives of those who truly cared for him. His siblings, his friends, and the people who had witnessed his struggles mourned not only his death, but the way it had come to pass. His murder was a reminder that trust, when placed in the wrong hands, could lead to devastation. In the end, Craig Rideout's legacy became more than just his tragic death. It became a cautionary tale of how love, when twisted by manipulation, could turn into something monstrous. And though the Rideouts were locked away, the echoes of Craig's tragedy lingered, a solemn reminder of the darkness that sometimes hides in the places we least expect. Betrayal is the cruelest kind of murder. It doesn't come from the shadows. It comes from the people you trust the most. Craig Rideout's story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger isn't a stranger. It's the family standing right beside you. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. The Rideout case is a tragedy that exposes the darkest corners of human nature, the lengths people will go to for control, revenge, or blind loyalty. It forces us to question the very foundation of trust and the terrifying reality that sometimes love itself can be lethal. This was a twisted betrayal, the murder of Craig Rideout, and this is real-life horror. Every victim had a story. Every case deserves to be told. If this one moved you, like, share, and subscribe to uncover more.